Welcome to part 13 of this YSL tutorial series on basic programming in Visual C#. In this part of the series we're going to cover how to use lists, and we'll begin the video with a quick look at how to create a list and various techniques for adding items to your list. We'll explain the difference between the count and capacity of a list and investigate how the capacity changes automatically as you add new items into your list, and also talk about how you can initialize a list to provide some default values before you even begin adding items to it. We'll talk about 3 techniques for looping through your list items, including while loops, for loops, and ForEach loops, and also show you how you can sort a list in both ascending and descending order. We'll show you several methods for removing list items, including a brief introduction to using Lambda expressions, and also show you a variety of techniques for finding items in a list, whether that's based on the position of the item or based on a value of an item that you want to find. So there's a lot to do in this video. Let's get started. To get started in this video, you'll need a copy of the project we worked on in the last part of the series. If you need to get hold of a copy, you can use the link in the description below the video to download one. And once you've done that, head into Visual Studio and then head to the File menu and choose to open up your project. You can do that either by clicking Open Project and then browsing to where you've downloaded your copy, or if you've worked on it recently, use the Recent Projects and Solutions menu instead and click on the project you want to open up. So once again, we're going to open up our WODA project, the YSL's dating agency, and this is the starting point for our video on lists. To demonstrate how lists work, we're going to have a new form in our project that allows you to choose your qualities and the qualities you'd like to see in your partner. So to do that, let's head into the Solution Explorer and right-click on the project, and we can choose to add a new Windows form. I'm going to call the form WODA Qualities, and then click Add or press Enter to create the form. We're going to add a simple list box using the toolbox, so if you find the toolbox menu and look for the Listbox control in there, we're going to drag one of those onto the form. And a quick little resize, and I'm going to rename the list box as well with a sensible name. So in the properties window, we can change the name of the list box so that it's called something like qualities. I'd also like a way for this form to be displayed from the main WODA application form. So what we're going to do next is open up the WODA application form, and on there we're going to draw another button. So using the toolbox again, we're going to find the button control and draw one of those somewhere on the form. I'm going to drop mine below the button we added in the last video. We're going to change the text on the button, so it says something like choose qualities, and then we can change the name of the button as well, so that that's called something like choose qualities button. We then need to add a bit of code to this button so that it will open up a new instance of our qualities form. So let's double click on the button to generate the event handling procedure for that, and then we can create a simple couple of lines of code. So we're going to create a variable which can reference a WODA qualities form, and I'm going to call that qualities form, and we're going to make that equal to a new instance of the WODA qualities form. Then all we want to do is display that form on screen by saying qualities form.show. So we can apply the show method to that instance of the form. Just a very quick little test. We should have the WODA application form opening up by default when we run the program file. So if we just quickly check in the program file that the main method creates a new instance of the WODA application form, which it does, we can start the application, and when the form finally appears, we should be able to click on the Choose Qualities button to display the new instance of our form. So that's all working perfectly. What we're going to do now is head into the code behind our WODA Qualities form and start working with some lists. The first bit of code we're going to write is going to be associated with the form's load event. So there are 2 quick ways you can generate the load event handler for this form. You can either just double click somewhere in the background of the form, or select the form and in the properties window head to the events list and double click on the load event in there. So that'll generate the load event handler for the form itself. And just like we did last time in the video on arrays, but rather than write out all of our code directly in the load event handler, we're going to write several separate methods which we can then call into the load event. So let's create another quick method, and this one's going to demonstrate how to declare a list in the first place. So we're going to have another private void which we'll call declare list, and then in here we can write the bit of basic code that will do exactly that. You begin declaring a list by writing out the word list, and then open a set of angled brackets and pass in the type of thing that you want your list to contain. Now, the type of thing a list can contain can be pretty much anything. It can be a basic data type such as ints and strings. It can also be references to objects such as forms or controls in a form. For our list, we're going to store a list of strings. So I'm going to say list string, and then close the angle brackets, and then following that we need to give our list a sensible name. So I'm going to call mine qualities list, and then we can create a new instance of that list by saying equals new list string, which should appear in the IntelliSense list, and then open and close a set of parentheses and a semicolon at the end, and that will declare and create a new instance of a list that can contain string items. If you remember from the previous video in this series on arrays, when you declare an array, you have to state the size of the array, so you have to declare how many elements you want your array to contain. With a list, you don't do that. A list automatically resizes based on the items you add to it, and adding items to a list is remarkably straightforward. You refer to the list variable, so qualities list in our case, and then we apply the add method to it. There's a couple of other ways to add items to a list as well, which we'll see later on in the video, but the add method is the simplest way to add a single item to the list. So if you open a set of parentheses, you can then pass in the item that you want to add to the list. So in our case, because our list contains strings, we can add a string to the list. So what qualities might we want to have for people that we might be dating? So let's have the first quality might be good looks, for instance, or good looks, as I've typed it there. Good looks. Try that again. A semicolon at the end, and we can continue simply doing that, adding more items to the list by saying qualities list dot add. What other useful qualities should we have? Wealth, which is a very important quality in somebody we're dating, not that we're shallow or anything. We should have another couple of items, let's say qualities list dot add. Make sure they've got a flash car or something like that as well. And then maybe one more, qualities list dot add, and we'll have important job. So some nice, important, deep, well thought out qualities for people in our dating agency, but that's a straightforward way to add single items to our list. If you step through your code, you can actually watch the list increasing in size as you add new items into it. So to demonstrate that, let's make a call to the declare list method in our load event handler for the form. So we'll say declare list, open and close parentheses and a semicolon, and I'm also going to set a breakpoint on the signature line of the declare list method. What we can then do is start the application, and when the application form appears, we can click on our Choose Qualities button, and we'll find that we're paused on the first line of code in the declare list method. So currently the locals window, if you can't see that by the way, head to the debug menu, choose Windows, Locals. In the locals window, you can see that the qualities list variable currently references null, because we haven't got to the point where we create a new instance of it yet. If we press F11 a couple of times on the keyboard, we'll find that the qualities list has a new instance of a list created, and it shows us the count property of the list. So the count is the number of items currently contained in the list, which is set to 0. There's another important property of a list you can see here as well. If you expand the qualities list and you expand the raw view section in there, you'll see that there's also a property called capacity. Now capacity is the number of items that the list can have added to it before it needs to be resized. So that means that if I add a first item into the list, the count will increase, but the capacity has to increase as well. So if I press F11 to add my first item, I'll see the count's increased to 1. There's one item currently in the list. If I expand that, I can see that the good looks item has been added at index position number 0. If I expand the raw view section, I'll find that the capacity is also increased as well, but not just by 1, up to 4. That means that the capacity doesn't increase every single time you add an item to the list. If I press F11 3 times to add my next 3 items into the list, what I'll find is the count has increased up to 4, so there are actually 4 items in the list. If I expand it, I'll see that the 4 items are there, indexed from 0 to 3. In the raw view section, I'll find that the capacity has remained 4. So if I added one more item, the capacity would have to increase again. But it means that the capacity doesn't have to increase for every individual item that you add. Let's just stop debugging at that point and close the output window. And let's have a look at what happens when we add a few more items into the list. So let's add a few more items then. We'll cheat, I guess, quickly and copy and paste the 4 items we've added previously, and then paste those in, and then we just modify the actual values for these. So let's have a few sensible ones, I guess. Let's have a sense of humour, and we'll have generosity, and we'll have I don't know, let's have something like empathy, and let's have something like intelligence. And one more we'll have as well. Let me just copy and paste that line one more time, and we'll have creativity as well. So currently we're going to have 9 items in the list altogether, so the count of the list at the end will be 9. So let's watch what happens to the count and capacity properties when we step through this procedure then. Let's start the application and then click the Choose Qualities button, and again we'll be paused on the first line of our declare list method. Let's quickly step through to the point where we've added 4 items. So I'm going to step through using the F11 key up to the point we had previously, so we've added in the first 4 items, so the count of the list is 4 and the capacity is also 4. What we can then do, if we press F11 again, is add a new item to the list, so the count has increased to 5. The capacity of the list this time is increased up to 8, so it's doubled in size. Let's add in 3 more items to the list, so we fill the capacity of the list. Let's press F11 3 more times. So that's a count of items in the list of 8, and again the capacity is 8. So this time when we add 1 more item, the list will double in size again. So the count is now 9, but the capacity of the list is 16. If we filled the capacity of the list at that point and then added 1 more item, the capacity would increase to 32 and 64 and so on and so on and so on. So the list capacity doubles in size rather than just adding regular increments. This is something worthwhile mentioning, worthwhile knowing. If you've got very, very large lists and you don't fill up the entire capacity, you may well want to reduce the capacity only to the number of items held in the list. And we can do that by applying a simple method to our list. So let's just stop debugging at that point and close down the output window, and we'll see how we can reduce the capacity of our list if we haven't filled it up. The method that reduces the capacity of a list down to the minimum required size for the number of elements it contains is called trim excess. So we can demonstrate that by adding a new line of code to our declare list method. We'll say qualities list dot trim excess. Open and close some parentheses and then a semicolon at the end. Then just to demonstrate one other thing as well, we're going to add 1 more item to the list after we've trimmed the excess. So we can say qualities list dot add, and then I can't think. Let's just say test. We don't really need to add a real item this time. So I'm just going to change where the breakpoint sits this time as well, so I don't want to have to step through all these lines of code again. I'm going to set the breakpoint on the line in which we add the last item before we trim the excess. Then we can start the application again, and we can click on our Choose Qualities button, and we'll step through all the lines of code up to that point. So the qualities list currently has a count of 8, and it must have a capacity of 8 at that point as well, which it does. If we press F11 again, we'll add that new item, which has increased the count to 9 and the capacity up to 16. Just a quick reminder. And then if we say trim excess, we'll see that the capacity changes down to 9. So it's trimmed to the minimum size it must be for the number of elements that it already contains. Now, when we add another item following that, so the current capacity of the list is 9, when we press F11 again to add another item, once again, the capacity doubles in size based on its current size, so it goes up to 18 this time. So that's just a quick little demonstration of how the capacity changes based on adding items and how you can reduce the capacity of a list as well using the trim excess method. Let's stop debugging, close the output window, and let's get rid of that breakpoint there as well. Rather than relying on your list to change its capacity dynamically, you can actually set the capacity of a list explicitly. So let's imagine for this example we know that we're going to add 9 items into our list. Let's just remove the 2 lines that trim the excess and add that test item. What we could do before we start adding the items is set the capacity property of the list. So we can say qualities list dot capacity equals, and then an integer for the number of items we know we're going to add. So if I just set a quick breakpoint on that line and then start the application again, we can then click the Choose Qualities button, and we'll see that the count currently is 0 and the capacity must be 0 then as well. So there it is. And then if we press F11 to execute that line, we'll see that the capacity increases to the exact number we've specified. So if I press F11 to quickly add in all of these items, we'll see that we don't exceed the initial capacity of the list, so the list never has to resize dynamically. So there's a tiny overhead involved in dynamically resizing the list. So if you know the number of items you're going to add, you can save a tiny amount of time. With such a small example, setting the initial capacity of a list and trimming the excess in such a small example won't really save you a huge amount of performance, but it's worth bearing in mind for the real world. With much larger lists, these are 2 things you can do to try to increase the performance of your code. There is just one other way that you can set the capacity of a list, other than by using the capacity property. There's actually an overloaded constructor method for the list class that allows you to specify its capacity when you first create it. So to demonstrate that, let's take away the semicolon and the curly bracket as the round brackets at the end of the list declaration. And if I open the round brackets again, we'll see the tooltip appears and shows you that there are 3 different overloads for the constructor for the list. So if I click through this list, you'll see that the second overload shows me that there's a parameter called capacity that takes an int. So I can pass in the number 9, for example, and then the semicolon at the end. If I then take away the line which explicitly sets the capacity property, we'll see that this time when we first initialize the list, when we first create the list, then it's already got a capacity of 9. So we can demonstrate that really quickly with a quick breakpoint starting the application. And then if we look in, if we click the choose qualities button first of all. So if I press F11 to step through and create the list, rather than having a capacity of 0 as it ordinarily would, this list has got a capacity of 9, which is exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to stop debugging at that point and then close down the output window as well. Just as you can with an array, you can populate a list by initializing it. So let's demonstrate that using a new method. Let's create a new method which will be a private void, and I'm going to call this one initialize list. And in there we're going to start by declaring a new list. So let's say list string. We're going to call it qualities list again. And then we're going to make this equal to a new list string. If I open and close the round brackets, then I'm not going to set the capacity this time, and I'm not going to type in the semicolon straight away either. What I'm going to do instead is open and close a set of braces. And inside the braces, what I can do is write out a comma-separated list of the individual items I want to populate the list with when it's first declared. So I say write out, I'm actually going to cheat, of course, and just copy and paste a few from the previous routine. So let's copy and paste maybe 3 or 4, separating them with commas. It's slow and tedious, but it's better than writing them out by hand, of course. Nearly done. One more. Of course, you're not stuck in a list with that final or that initial list of values. You can change the number of items in a list by adding more items to it at any point. That's the beauty of a list over and above an array. So although the list will begin with 4 elements in it, we can certainly add more items to it later on just by using the add method. So let's cheat completely here and just copy and paste those 5 remaining add methods from the previous method. And then if we want to just quickly test that to see what happens, let's set a breakpoint on the signature line of that method, and we'll remove the breakpoint from the previous method. And then we just need to modify what method we call in the load event handler. So rather than calling the declare list method, we'll now call the initialize list method instead. So if we start the application again, and then we can click on our choose qualities button. So we'll see when we begin pressing F11, when we execute this instruction, you'll see that the qualities list begins with a count of 4 and a capacity of 4 as well. We'll see then that as we add more items into the list, it will just grow as previously. So the capacity increases to double its size, and then it will fill up all those values. When we reach a count of 8, the capacity will still be 8 at this point as well. Then when we add one more item, the list size will double again, or the capacity will double again at least, and then we can carry on filling in more values. So a couple of different ways of creating a list and populating it with values. You'll find all these techniques useful in the real world, so let's just give you a quick flavour for the basics. Another technique you can use to add items to a list is called add range, which allows you to add more than one item at the same time. So let's demonstrate that again with another method. Let's have another private void, which we'll call add range of items. And in a set of braces, we will first of all declare, let's in fact just copy and paste the qualities list from the previous routine. So we can copy and paste that entire definition into our new method. What we could then do is declare yet another list. Let's have another list string, which we'll call more qualities, inventively, which will be equal to a new list string. And then we'll initialize this one as well. So we'll populate this with some values, which we can just copy and paste from the previous method. So let's just generate a quick comma separated list as quickly as we can. What we're then going to do is essentially we're just going to combine these two lists together by inserting all of the items from the second list into the first one. So nearly there. One more to copy. once we've done this, what we can now do is add a range of items into the qualities list. So we do that by saying qualities list dot add range, and then open some parentheses, and then we pass in a reference to the second list. So we're going to pass in more qualities. And if we can then just step through this procedure, so we set a breakpoint on the signature line, and then we can change the method that we're calling in the load event handler. We can call this add range of items, and then start the application, of course, click on our choose qualities button, and we'll see as we step through using the F11 key. So we can quickly populate the two individual lists. So one has a count of 4, one has a count of 5. The qualities list will have a capacity of 4, and the more qualities list will have a capacity of 8. When we combine the two together, we'll see that the qualities list now has a capacity of, has a count of 9, and its capacity will have increased somewhere, there it is, to 9 as well. So that's the add range method that allows you to add more than one item into a list at the same time. Once again, let's stop debugging there and close down the output window and get rid of that breakpoint too. It's worth mentioning that for the add range method, your second range doesn't necessarily have to come from another list. It could also come from, for instance, an array. So once we've added the more qualities list to our original qualities list, we could also then declare a string array. So if you remember from the previous video, you can declare an array like so. So we can say string, open and close square brackets. We'll call this even more qualities, I guess. Not very inventive, but there we go. And we'll make this equal to a new string array, new string, and in square brackets let's just set 3 elements for the size of this array. What we can then do is populate the array, so we can say even more qualities 0 equals, I can't even think of some real properties, some real ones, let's just call them test1, not very inventive, and then copy and paste that line a couple of times and change them to 1 and 2, and we'll call them test 2 and test 3. What we can then do is apply the add range method to our qualities list again. So we can say qualities list dot add range, and then in parentheses we can then pass in a reference to our string array. So we'll pass in even more qualities. So once again, let's just set that quick little breakpoint on the, tell you what, let's set the breakpoint on this line here, so where we've actually populated our array. We can then start the application and then click choose qualities. So we're at the point where our qualities list contains 9 items at this point. So if we press F11 to execute this line, we'll find that it goes up to 12, and that will increase the capacity again, of course, automatically. We'll see that our new test items have been added in. So the capacity of the list now is up to 18, so it's doubled in size. So again, using the add range method allows you to populate more than one item or add more than one item to the list in one go. Just while we're on the subject of using arrays, it's worthwhile mentioning that you can use an array to initialize a list. Let's demonstrate that quickly with another new method, which we'll call, it'll be a private void, of course, so private void initialize list using array. And then in there, the first thing we'll do is copy and paste the array from the previous method. Now what we can do is create a new list. So let's say list string, which we'll call test list for now. It doesn't really matter what its name is for this simple example. And we can make this equal to a new list string, and then open the parentheses. And what we're going to do this time is use the third overload of the constructor method for the list class. What this tells us is that we can pass in something that conforms to the IEnumerable interface. So an array is something that conforms to that. It's a collection of items that conforms to that particular interface. So if we just pass in a reference to our even more qualities array, which we can do like so, then that will create a list that stores all of the items contained in the original array. So once again, let's just quickly test this and demonstrate how it works. So we can set a breakpoint on the signature line of the method and then change the method that we're calling in the load event handler. So this will be initialize list using array. Then we can start the application with the start button, click on our choose qualities button, and then we'll see as we step through, we'll populate our array with its 3 elements, and then we'll see that when we create the new test list variable, it will immediately have a count of 3 with those 3 items stored in it. So that's just simply how you can use an array to populate or initialize a list. Just as one final quick note on declaring and initializing lists, let's show you how you can initialize one list using another list. It's very similar to what we've just done here with initializing a list using an array. We can create another quick private void, which we'll call initialize list using list. And then in there, let's cheat as much as we possibly can. Let's create a copy of our more qualities list from our previous method, including its initialization. And then what we're going to do is declare a new list. So we'll say list, if I can type that properly, there we go, list string, which we'll call, once again, we'll call it test list. We'll make this equal to a new list string, and initialize this by passing in a reference to the more qualities list. So we can say more qualities, so it works in exactly the same way as it would with the array version. So again, if we just set a quick breakpoint on the signature line of that method, and then change which method gets called in the load event handler, we'll say initialize list using list. Start the application and click on our choose qualities button, and then quickly step through using the F11 key. So we see the more qualities list gets created with 5 items in it, and then the test list gets created with 5 items in it as well. So whatever items were contained in the more qualities list, which of course you can see by expanding these lists in the locals window. So that pretty much rounds off how you declare and populate and initialize lists. What we can move on to now is how you actually read values out of lists. Just to make life a little bit easier for the next few methods we're going to write, rather than having to declare a new list in each method, we're going to declare a list at the scope of the class. So let's head back up to the top of our class, and just inside the class's definition we're going to create or declare a new list string, which we're going to call, this time we're going to call it all qualities, and we're going to make this equal to a new list string, and we're also going to initialize it here as well. So I'm going to, on the next line, open and close a set of braces and then have a semicolon at the end. Rather than typing all these things out again, we can just copy and paste most of these from previous methods. So let's find a list of these sort of shallow, jokey qualities, if you can call them that. And then let's find the other ones, the real ones, the sense of humour ones. So there's another 5, and then we can copy and paste those into that list as well. Okay, so that list now, all qualities, is available to any method that we write within this class. So we'll use that now to demonstrate how you start reading values from a list. To demonstrate how to read items from a list in a basic way, we're going to populate the list box that we added to our form earlier. So that list box is called qualities. So what we're going to do is create another method. So we'll call it, will be a private void, which we'll call read items from list. And then in there, what we're going to do is just populate that list box one by one by reading out the values from our list one by one. So we won't do all of them, of course. So we'll refer to our we'll refer to our qualities list box, and we're going to refer to the items property of that list box, which refers to all of the items currently stored in it. And then we're going to apply the add method to the items collection. So if we open and close a set of round brackets inside there, we can refer to a single item from our list. So we've got the all qualities list, and I want to refer to the first item in it. Just like in an array, the items in a list are indexed with a base of 0. So if I open a set of square brackets and refer to the number 0, that refers to the first item in that list. So the simplest thing to do at that point, having entered the semicolon, is to just copy that line and paste it in a few times. And then we can simply change the numbers to refer to the other items in the list. Of course, we don't want to exceed the current limits of our list, so I'll just go up to 6 for this point. And then if we change the method that's being used in the load event handler for this form, so we're going to refer to the read items from list method instead. We can once again begin the start the application. I'm not going to bother setting a breakpoint this time. We're just going to see that when we click the choose qualities button, we'll read out the 7 items that we've referenced from our list. So that's how to reference individual items in a list using the index number of their position within the list. Of course, referring to each item in a list individually is fairly tedious, even for just a small list like this one. So more usefully, you can loop over the items in a list. And as always, there are 3 choices for looping. You can use either a while loop, a for loop, or a ForEach loop. So let's demonstrate quickly how a while loop allows you to loop over the items in a list. We'll have another method that demonstrates this. We'll have a private void while loop. And in this routine, we're going to start by declaring a variable. So we'll have an int I, which we'll use to count through the items in our loop, and we'll initialize this to 0. And then we can begin our while loop with the word while, of course. Then in a set of parentheses, the condition we'll test for is whether I is less than the count of items in our list. So we can say while I is less than all qualities dot count. So remember, the count property returns the number of items in the list. So if we then open and close a set of braces, what we're going to do is add an item to our qualities list box. So we can refer to qualities.items.add. And the item that we want to add will be all qualities, and then reference the item in the list using our counter variable, I. We have to make sure, of course, that we increment the value of I before we go around the next iteration of the loop. So we'll say I++, and that will loop through all the items in the list and populate the list box. Just a very quick look at how that works then. If we make a reference to this method or make a call to this method in the main event handler for the load event of the form, we can then start the application, and we'll see that when we click the Choose Qualities button, we'll get a list of all of the items from our list. So that's using basic while loops to loop through the items in a list. Now a for loop allows us to do pretty much exactly what this while loop does, just with a slightly more convenient syntax. So let's demonstrate that with another private void. We'll call this one for loop. And in here, we'll begin our for loop immediately by saying for, and then in a set of parentheses, there are 3 things we're going to specify. First of all, declaring a variable which allows us to keep track of the number of times we've gone through the loop. So we'll say int I and initialize that to 0, then a semicolon, and at that point we'll then write out the condition we're testing for each iteration of the loop. So again, it's going to be while I is less than all qualities dot count. What we can then do is add another semicolon and then say what we want to do to the I variable each time we go around the loop. So we're going to increment I by saying I++. So we've said all the same 3 things that we said for the while loop, just wraps up in a nice neat single statement rather than separated out onto multiple different lines. All we need to do then inside the for loop is exactly what we've done in the while loop. So I'm just going to cheat and copy and paste that line. And then we can replace the call to the while loop method in our forms load event with a call to the for loop method instead. So for loop, let's try that again, for loop, and then if we start the application, we'll see once again exactly the same thing happens when I click the Choose Qualities button. So that's 2 loops out of the way. One last loop to look at, which is a ForEach loop. The ForEach loop provides us with possibly the most convenient syntax for doing what we're trying to do here. So let's have another method, private void ForEach loop, and then in there we can start our ForEach loop with the word ForEach. In a set of parentheses then what we have to do is declare a variable that can hold a reference to a single item in the collection we're looping over. So we're looping over a collection of string items, so we're going to declare a variable which will be of a string data type. You'll often find this is called something short and simple like S simply. I'm going to call mine quality. It's a bit more descriptive. So I'm going to say string quality in all qualities. So that references the list. What we can then do is once again just add an item into the qualities list box by saying qualities.items.add. But this time we don't have to worry about what indexed position the item holds. All we need to do is refer to the variable that we declared in the ForEach loop itself. So we're going to refer to the quality variable. So once again, the end result will be exactly the same, just with a much neater syntax, I personally think. There are reasons for using a for loop over a ForEach loop, which we'll actually see later on in the video, but for this simple example, a ForEach loop is almost certainly the best choice. So let's just have a quick little test of that by replacing the call to the for loop with the call to the ForEach loop instead. And then we can start the application again and click Choose Qualities, and we'll end up with exactly the same list as we've seen previously. So that's the quick summary overview of the 3 different types of loops you can use to process a list. Now for this particular example, the quickest way to add items into a list box doesn't involve looping over our list at all. We can simply set a basic property of a list box to refer it to the list we've created. Let's quickly demonstrate that with another method. We'll call this private void populate Listbox quickly. And all we're going to do in here is reference or set a single property of our listbox. So the listbox is called qualities, and the property we're going to set is the data source property. We can simply make this equal to our all qualities list. So that's by far and away the quickest way to populate it. Just to prove that it works, let's have a quick call to this populate listbox quickly method in the load event. So we'll replace this with a call to populate listbox quickly, and then start the application again. And one more time, click on the Choose Qualities button and see the exact same list populating our listbox. So we can close down all these forms. Of course, looping over a list is a useful skill in and of itself. You will need to do this in several cases, but if it's a listbox on a form, then this is probably the quickest and simplest way to achieve what you're trying to do. While we're talking about list boxes, one other way to add a bunch of items into a list box is by using the addRange method of the items property of a list box. So we've seen the addRange method used in our list earlier on, but it's worth noting that a list box also has a similar method. So if we just comment out the setting the data source property of the list box, we can say qualities.items.addRange. Now, as I say, we saw this earlier on with our individual lists. What we can't do with a list box, however, is pass in a reference to a list. Sadly, that's not accepted. If I try to refer to all qualities, this is not a valid type to pass into the addRange method. A valid type that you can pass into the addRange method is an array. So what we could do is we could convert our all qualities list into an array, and there is a simple method you can apply to a list in order to let you do that. So we could say all qualities dot to list. Sorry, beg pardon, to array, which already is a list. So we apply the toArray method to the all qualities list, and that will convert it into an array, and then pass that into the items property of the qualities list box. Phew. So if we just start the application just to prove that it actually works after all that, we'll see when we click the Choose Qualities button, once again we get the complete list of items added into the list box. The advantage of doing this with the list box, adding a range of items rather than setting the data source, is once you set the data source, you can't then subsequently add other items to it. If you simply add a range of items to the list box, then you can add more items to it later on and remove items from it and so on. So that's why you might want to consider doing these two different things. The items in your list don't have to remain in the order they were added to the list. You can sort the items in either ascending or descending order. It's very simple to do, just like with an array in fact. So let's have another quick method that allows us to do this. Let's have a private void sort list items, and we'll begin by adding the parentheses in the correct way first of all, and then in the braces we will say all qualities dot sort, and that will simply sort things in ascending order, and we can then populate the qualities list box just to demonstrate that they have been sorted in the correct order. So we can say qualities.dataSource equals all qualities, the quickest and simplest way to do it. And then if we make a call to that method now in the load event handler for the form, sort list items, and then start the application, and one more time click on the Choose Qualities button, and now that our items are sorted in ascending order. Sorting things in reverse order is incredibly simple as well. It requires us to have sorted things in ascending order first of all, and then what we can simply do is reverse the order of the items. So we can do that by, once we've sorted the list, we can say all qualities.reverse. So we apply the reverse method, and then start the application again one more time, and click the Choose Qualities button and find things in descending order instead. So a couple of quick simple things you can do to change the order of items in your list. Next, let's have a look at a few different ways to remove items from a list. So let's start by removing an item from a list based on its name. So we'll have another method that demonstrates this, private void remove single items. And in this method, we're going to start simply by removing an item from the all qualities list. To do that, we say all qualities.remove, and then pass into that method the name of the item we're trying to get rid of. So let's get rid of the wealth item from our list. Once we've removed it, we can then populate the list box on the form. So we can say qualities.dataSource equals all qualities, just to see the results. And then we'll need to change the method that's called in the event handler for the load event for the form to remove single items. So we can get rid of the sort list items and call remove single items instead. If we start the application then by clicking the Start button and once again click the Choose Qualities button, we'll see that our list now consists of only 8 items rather than the 9 we had previously, and the wealth item has disappeared. So let's close down the forms and get rid of the output window. That's one way to remove an item based on its name. We can also remove an item from a list based on its position within the list. So after we've removed the wealth item, let's sort the list so we know what order things are going to be in. So we'll say allQualities.sort, and that should place the creativity item as the first item in the list. That will have an index of 0. So what we're then going to do is say allQualities.removeAt, and here we can pass in the index of the position of the item we want to remove. So I'm going to say remove at 0. So we'll then, of course, populate the data source property of the qualities list box again, and then if we start the application, we should find that both wealth and creativity are missing from our list now. So you see that creativity is gone and wealth is also gone, so we're down to 7 items in the list. So let's close those down again and get rid of the output window one more time. Now let's imagine we want to remove multiple items from our list, perhaps a group of items that meet a certain condition. There's a couple of different approaches you can use to remove multiple items from a list, but based on what we already know and what we've covered in this video, one approach would be to loop through all of the list items and for each one test whether it meets a condition, and if so, remove it. So let's begin a new method that will demonstrate how that works. So let's have private void remove multiple items. Now we need to choose the appropriate type of loop to achieve our aims. I think as we saw earlier on, the ForEach loop provides us with the neatest syntax for looping over list items. But there's a small problem with using ForEach loops, which you might remember from the video we covered on ForEach loops. We still have the code in this project, in fact, from that video. One of the conditions of a ForEach loop is you can't change the items in the collection that you're looping over. So you can't add items to or remove items from it. And because that's exactly what we're trying to do with our list, we can't use a ForEach loop for this example. So that leaves us with a while loop or a for loop, and either would work, but I think the for loop syntax is slightly nicer. So we're going to use a for loop, but again we still have to be slightly careful about the way we structure this. Let's start by doing this in the same way we did it earlier on in the video. We'll have for int I equals 0, and then we'll test while I is less than allQualities.count, and then we'll increment I by saying I++. And then inside the loop, what we need to do is test for a certain condition. So I'd like to test for all of the items in our list that begin with the letter G. So that gives us, there'll be 2 items that will be removed. There's good looks and generosity. So we'll say if, and then we can say all qualities and pass in the integer variable to refer to the index position of the item we're looking at. Because this returns a string, we can apply any string method to the items. We can say dot starts with, for example, which is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to test if the item starts with a particular character. So we can pass in the letter G. This is case sensitive, by the way, this particular search. So if that condition is true, what I'd then like to do is remove the item at that position in the list. So I can say all qualities dot remove at, and then in a set of parentheses, pass in the value of I again, and a semicolon. Just to see the final result, let's sort our list, and then we'll pass it into the list box. So we'll say all qualities.sort, and then we will see that if we say qualities, which is the name of the list box, dot data source equals all qualities. What we can then do is change the call in the load event handler to remove multiple items, rather than remove single items. And then if we start the application, and when we've done that, click on the Choose Qualities button, we'll see that our list doesn't contain either of the items that begins with the letter G. So that's all nice and neat and straightforward. Let's close down the form, and both forms in fact, and close down the output window as well. Now, although this technique appeared to work, it's not quite as robust as it might first appear. Let's show you how flaky it is just by changing where a single line of code is in this particular method. I'm going to move the allQualities.sort up to just above where we start looping through our list. And then if we just run the application again, we'll see what happens when we click the Choose Qualities button. So you might notice here that although we told it to get rid of anything that begins with the letter G, there's one item beginning with the letter G still remaining. So what's happened there? Well, this is probably easiest to see if we set a breakpoint and step through the code. So let's set a breakpoint on the on the start line of our for loop. If we start the application again now then, we can click on our Choose Qualities button and we'll be paused on the first pass through our for loop. So if we want to be able to see the all qualities list, then we'll have to expand the this node in the locals window. So because we've declared this as scoped to the form now, scoped to the class, it doesn't appear as a local item. So what we can then do is begin stepping through using the F11 key to begin stepping through our list. So the first time we pass through this, we're looking at item number 0, which in the all qualities list is creativity. That doesn't begin with a G, so we step over the if statement and then go to the next iteration of the list. So at that point we're going to find item number 1, which is empathy, and we'll carry on doing that essentially until we get to generosity. So at some point shortly, when we reach item number 3, which is this one, we'll find that we do begin with the letter G. So generosity is now going to be removed from position number 3 in the list. What that will do is shuffle all of the other items up to occupy the space left by generosity. So we'll see that if we expand all qualities again, that where generosity previously was, good looks now sits. So good looks now occupies position number 3. Now I is currently 3, but on the next pass through the loop, of course, we've told I to increment, so I is going to go up to 4 eventually. There it goes. So I is now 4, which means that when we go to our if statement, we're testing the item at position number 4, so we've completely circumvented the good looks item. So this is the problem with this particular loop, or looping forwards through our list. So I'm just going to stop debugging at that point, and then close down the output window and remove the breakpoint. What we really need to do in order to make this work is loop through the list in reverse order. So in order to make this work, we need to change 3 things about the definition of our for loop. First of all, rather than initializing I to 0, we need to initialize it to a value of 1 less than the count of items in the all qualities list. So we can say for int I equals allQualities.count minus 1. What we then need to do is change the condition that we're testing for, so rather than checking whether I is less than allQualities.count, instead we need to check if I is greater than or equal to a value of 0, which will be the lowest bound element in the list. Finally, we need to make sure that we don't increase the value of I each time we go through the loop. Instead, we need to decrease it. So we'll decrement the variable by saying I minus minus. What we can now do is if we start the application, we'll see that the end result will be exactly what we want. If we click the Choose Qualities button, we'll end up with no items beginning with the letter G, regardless of what order the list happens to be in. So we can close down those 2 forms, and let's get rid of the output window there as well. Having shown you all of the things that can go wrong when you're trying to remove multiple items from a list in a loop, I'm going to show you now one much quicker, much easier way to achieve the same result. So we're going to create another method that does this. Let's say private void remove items quickly. And then in that method, we're going to apply a single method to our list. We're going to say allQualities.remove all. Now the name of the method remove all is slightly misleading because it doesn't remove every single item from your list. It removes all of the items which meet a certain condition. And in order to pass in the condition you're testing for, you'll see that when you open the parentheses, the tooltip shows you there's a single parameter of the removal method called predicate. Now you're going to see this parameter predicate turn up quite a lot in the remainder of this video, and you see it a lot when you're working with certain methods of lists and arrays. Without getting too deeply into what's actually required here, what we're going to pass into the remove all method is something called a lambda expression. Now a lambda expression is a special kind of anonymous function, and if you're really interested in how they work, we'll see them again later on in the video, and we'll explain them in a lot more detail in a later video in this series. But there is a nice little help page available on the Microsoft Developer Network that explains all about how lambda expressions work. So a quick Google search will turn that up fairly quickly. For us, we just need to see quickly how we can create a condition using a lambda expression that finds all of the items that begin with the letter G. The first thing we need to state for a lambda expression is the name and optionally the type of any input parameter we want to use in the expression. So we're going to pass in a reference to the list item that we're evaluating. We can give this parameter any name we like. Typically you'll see things like S or X, short single letter names for the parameters. I'm going to give mine a slightly more descriptive name. I'm going to call my parameter quality. Now because I'm only using a single parameter and I'm not declaring its type, then that's all I need to do. I can optionally wrap up the name of the parameter in a set of parentheses as well, however. So I could put the quality parameter name in round brackets. That is optional if I'm only using a single parameter. I would need to use the parentheses if I was trying to state the type of the parameter. So if I said string quality, then I would need to wrap that up in a set of round brackets. In most cases, the type of the parameter is inferred from the context that you're using the Lambda expression in. So in this case, we don't actually need that. So I'm actually going to remove those brackets, those round brackets, and the type of the parameter. So I've declared a single input parameter for the Lambda expression. The next thing I need to do is enter the Lambda operator, and that is signified with an equal sign and a closed angle bracket. Now it's very easy to get this confused, and I've done it myself many times, get this confused with a greater than or equal to comparison operator, which is angle brackets equals. Bear that in mind, the Lambda operator is definitely an equal sign and a closed angle bracket symbol. After the Lambda operator, we can then put in the condition we're testing for, and we can do this by referring to the input parameter, quality. Because quality is a string, because we're getting our values from a string list, we can apply any method to the string parameter that we want to. So we can say quality dot, and then we're going to say starts with, just as we did earlier on when we tested if the item in the list starts with G. So we're going to say starts with G again, and then close the parentheses for the starts with method, and that is the end of the Lambda expression. So all of that in that single line will essentially achieve exactly the same results as the complex loop that we wrote earlier on. So just to test that this works, let's set the data source property of our listbox. So we'll say qualities.dataSource equals all qualities. And then we can change the call to the method in the load event handler. Let's say remove items quickly instead. So find the load event handler and refer to remove items quickly. There it is. And then we can start the application and click on the choose qualities button and find once again we get the same list just without the items beginning with the letter G. So hopefully you'll agree with me that this is a much more convenient way to test for items in a list using the Lambda expression. We'll see this used again, as I say, a few more times in this video, but it's worthwhile getting used to these. You're going to see them a lot more from now on. Let's move on to how we can find items in a list. And we'll start with a simple method that we saw in the video on arrays, how to return the index of a particular item in the array. So we're going to create another method. So it'll be private void, and we'll call this findItemIndex. And then in this method, what we'd like to be able to do is, let's say we want to find the index of the wealth item in our list. So we're going to declare a simple integer variable that will hold the result of this method. So we'll say int I equals all qualities dot index of. So the index of method allows you to pass in a value that you're searching for. So in this case, the value is going to be a string because our list contains strings. So it's going to be index of, and we'll search for the wealth value. So that returns the position of the item in the list. What we can then do is use that value to do something useful. So let's say we want to change the value of the wealth item, and we can change it to a different value. So we can say all qualities, and then open some square brackets, pass in the value of I, and then we can say make that equal to health instead of wealth. So we can then put that list into our list box. We can say qualities.dataSource equals all qualities. And then once again change the call to that method in the event handler for the load event, find item index. And then if we start the application and click on the choose qualities button, we'll find that we don't have health, we do have health instead of wealth. So that's one quick way to find an item, or the position of an item in a list. Now it's possible to search for an item in a list which doesn't exist, and if that's the case, then the index of method returns a value of -1. So we should probably add an if statement to this little routine here. So we should say, before we try to modify the value of that item, we should say if I is greater than or equal to 0, then we can change the value of that particular item. So otherwise we might try to change a value that's out of the range of the list, and that would be bad. So let's make sure we always make sure that we've returned an index that's actually within the bounds of the list itself. We can have a quick little test of that. It won't make any difference to what we've done. If we click choose qualities, it will change wealth to health again. So that's using the index of method to return the index of an item in your list. There's also a range of find methods for a list which use Lambda expressions. So let's have a quick look at how some of those work. Let's have another method. We'll say private void find items with Lambda. And then we can have a look at 4 of these different methods. So the first thing we're going to do is find the index of a particular item in the list, or the index of the first item that matches our condition. So we're going to have another integer variable. So what we're going to do is try to find the first item in our list which contains the letter A. So I'm going to say int first A index equals all qualities dot find first index. Find index. So this finds the index of the first item that matches the condition we test for. So find index, open a set of parentheses, and then we enter, you see this predicate parameter again, so we enter a Lambda expression which evaluates the condition we're looking for. So what we need to do here is we need to declare an input parameter. I'm going to call mine quality again, and then the Lambda operator, which is equals and then a closed angle bracket, and then the condition we're testing for this time we're going to say quality dot, rather than starts with as we did last time, we're going to use contains, which finds out if the string contains a particular string. So contains, then open some parentheses, and I'm going to look for a lowercase letter a. There's another similar method which finds the last index of a particular value. So we're going to have another int that says last a index, and we're going to make this equal to all qualities dot find last index, which again you can see in the list. And if you open the parentheses, it's exactly the same predicate parameter. So I'm just going to copy and paste the Lambda expression from the previous, and then close the semicolon at the end of that line. 2 more we can look at. These actually return an actual value rather than just the index position, so they return the value from the list. So the items in our list, of course, contain strings. So I'm going to declare a string variable, which will be called, I'll just call it first a, equals all qualities dot find. So once again, the find method takes this predicate parameter. So I'm going to pass in, I'm just going to paste in what I just copied previously. So quality contains a. And once again, there's a similar method that finds the last instance of a particular thing. So I'm going to say string last a equals all qualities dot find last. Open some round brackets and then paste in what I've copied previously, that same Lambda expression. So that will return both the index and the value of the first and last item that contains the letter A in our list. Now, just like the index of method, the find index and find last index methods will return -1 if they don't find a match. So again, it would be worthwhile writing an if statement to check that that's not the case. For the find and find last methods, they will return the default value of the type that you're using. So for a string, that's a null. So if the find and find last methods couldn't find the letter A in any of the strings of the list, then it will return null for each of those. I'm pretty confident that in this particular example we're going to return a value for every single one of the things we're testing for. So what we're going to do just to demonstrate the results is first of all populate the list box to make sure we can see the final list in the list box when the form appears. So we'll say qualities.dataSource equals all qualities. And then we're going to show a message box on screen that just displays some information about the values stored in our variables. Let's have a message box.show. And in there, let's build up a message which will start with, let's have a literal string that will say something like first A equals, and then we can concatenate the value of our first A index. So we'll say plus first A index. And I'm going to apply the string method to that, although it's technically not necessary. And then I'm going to say plus another basic string plus first A. So I'll show the value of that as well. Then I'm going to have another plus to concatenate an escape sequence, \n, which will give us a new line character. And then on the next line, I'm going to say last A equals plus last A index dot to string plus a dash to separate that from the actual value plus last A. So that will actually show the value of the last item containing the letter A in the list. So a semicolon there. We're going to change once again the method that we're calling in the main event handler for the load event of the form. So we'll change that so that it's called find items with Lambda. And then if we begin the application by either clicking the start button or pressing F5, and once more click on the choose qualities button, we'll find that the first item that contains the letter A is at position number 1, that's wealth. The last item is at position number 8, that's creativity. And if we show that, there's wealth and there's creativity, so that's absolutely true. So that's another example of using Lambda expressions to work with lists. And you do something very, very similar with arrays as well, just in case you're working with arrays. These Lambda expressions and these find index and find last methods also apply to arrays as well. One final find technique to look at is the find all method, and as the name suggests, this one finds all of the items which match the condition you're testing for. So again, like the removal method, it takes a Lambda expression. So let's create another method. We'll call this private void find all items. And then in here, we can use the find all method. The find all method returns a list of items, so what we need to be able to do with the find all method is have somewhere to store that list. So we're actually going to start by declaring another list. So I'm going to say list string found items, and we're going to make this equal to not a new list, but the result of applying the find all method to the all qualities list. So I'm going to say all qualities dot find all. In there then we can pass in a Lambda expression, so again we see this predicate parameter. So I'm just going to copy and paste the one from the previous method, in fact, just to save a bit of time. A semicolon at the end then will return that list. What we can then do, let me just put this onto a separate line so we can see the whole thing on one single screen width. What we can then do is display that somewhere on our form. So in fact, let's display that in the list box. I'm going to say qualities.dataSource equals found items. So what we should end up with in this example is a list of only the items that contain a lowercase letter a somewhere in their name. So once again, we'll need to change the method that we're calling in the load event handler. So we can say remove that from find items with Lambda. We'll say find all items. Okay, so if we start the application now by clicking the start button and click choose qualities, we should find that the only items that appear in the list are the ones with a lowercase letter a somewhere in their names. So that kind of wraps up the various individual find methods that you can use with a list. Now that we've got a feel for how lists work in general, let's see if we can put it into slightly more of a practical context by modifying the design of our qualities form. What I'd like to be able to do is treat our original qualities list as the main list which we can select from to build a list of our own personal qualities and the qualities we're looking for in a partner. So let's change the design of the form, so we'll make it a lot wider to begin with, and we're going to move the qualities list as it stands somewhere roughly into the middle of the list box. Of the form, beg your pardon. So what we're then going to do is add a couple of extra list boxes and labels and buttons. So in fact, let's start with a couple of simple labels. I'm going to find the label control. I'm going to draw one of those up towards the top left-hand corner, and I'm going to change the text on that label so that it's labelled as your qualities. I'll spell qualities properly as well. And then something similar for your partner qualities. So from the toolbox again, I'm going to find the label tool and draw another label towards the top right hand corner. I'm going to change the text on that label so it says partner qualities with a capital P preferably, partner qualities. And then I'd like to add a couple of list boxes that will store the list of your and partner qualities. So let's find in the toolbox, we'll find the list box control, and I'm going to draw one of those underneath that label and try to make it roughly the same sort of height-ish as the original qualities list box. And I'm going to change the name of this one so that it's called your qualities. And then a similar one for the partner qualities. Let's call this one partner qualities. feel free to make your form a lot neater than mine, by the way. I'm not going to spend too much time with formatting and so on in this particular example. What I'm then going to do is draw a couple of buttons, one somewhere in the middle of your qualities and the main qualities list that will allow us to set our own personal qualities, and another one in the middle of qualities and partner qualities. So back in the toolbox, we'll find the button tool and draw one of those somewhere roughly in the middle, and we'll change the name of that button. I'm going to call this Set Your Qualities. And for the text, I'm going to draw a couple of angle brackets pointing to the left, and I'm going to say Set Your Qualities. I need to change the size of the button there to make it easier to read. There we go. And then a similar one for the partner qualities. Let's draw another button somewhere roughly in the middle there, and we'll change the size of that and change the text on the button so it says Set Partner Qualities, and with a couple of angle brackets pointing to the right. And then we can change the name of that button as well so that it's called Set Partner Properties. Set Partner Qualities, sorry. Set Partner Qualities. Okay. Next, I'd like to add two more list variables to our Woda Qualities class. So I'm going to go back to the code file, and right at the top where we declared and initialized our all qualities list earlier on, we're going to declare two new lists as well. So I'm going to say list string, and we're going to call this one your qualities list. And we're going to make this equal to a new list string. We're not going to initialize this one though, we're going to leave it empty to begin with. And likewise, we're going to create one called partner qualities list. So in fact, I'm going to copy and paste that line all together and then change the name of that one so it's not called your qualities list, I'm going to call it partner qualities list. If I can spell partner properly, of course. There we go, eventually. It's not actually necessary, but just as a quick reminder, if you rename variables having used them and reference them in code, you want to make sure you update all of the references to that variable. Obviously, I've only just declared this one, so I've not referenced it anywhere, but this little drop down allows you to quickly rename every instance of the original name to the new name, so that's nice and simple to do. So now that we've declared those, I'd like to add a bit of code to the click events of those buttons. In fact, before I do that, what I'd like to do is when my form loads, I'd like to not call on one of the methods that we've created previously. All I'm going to do is set the data source of the main list box on the form. So what I'm going to do is remove any reference to a previous method. We're going to sort the all qualities list first. We'll say all qualities.sort, and then we're going to say qualities dot data source equals all qualities. Now we can go and add some code to the click event of these buttons. So if we go back to the design view, the simplest way to do that is just to double click on one of the buttons to generate the event handler for that click event. There's a few things we want to do each time we click on this button. First of all, we want to make sure that we've cleared all of the contents from the Your Qualities list. So if we click on the Set Your Qualities button, we want to clear out any contents of the Your Qualities list first of all, clear out any contents for the Your Qualities list box on the form, loop over the selected items in the main qualities list, and then populate our list with those selected items, and finally populate the list box on the form. So let's do all those things relatively quickly. Let's see. So we've got your qualities list. We want to clear the contents of all of the items in the list. So we've seen the remove methods used earlier on. There's another quick simple method you can use to clear all the contents, which is simply called clear. We can remove the current values from the your qualities list box on the form by saying your qualities dot data source equals null, and then we can loop over the items in the selected items collection of the list box, adding a new value to our your qualities list for each one we encounter. So a for each loop is the simplest way to do that. Let's say for each, I'm going to say string s in qualities, which is the name of the main list box, dot selected items. For each one of those items we encounter, we'd like to say your qualities list dot add, and then the value we're going to add is going to be contained or referred to by the variable s. Once we've done that, we can then, let's just make sure that we sort the your qualities list. So we're going to say your qualities list dot sort, so it's in a sensible order, and then finally we can say your qualities, which is the name of the list box, dot data source equals your qualities list. So that's the first button done. The second button is going to be incredibly similar. So let's just head back to the design view quickly and double click the Set Partner Qualities button instead. And probably the simplest thing to do at this point is copy and paste all of the code from the previous method into this one, and then we can do a find replace. So if we select all of this text and then press Ctrl and H on the keyboard for the find replace dialog box, I'd like to find the word your, and I'd like to replace that with the word partner. And then we can click the replace all button, which is this one here, and we'll find that 6 occurrences were replaced, hopefully. And then we can close down the find replace dialog box, and those are those 2 buttons created. Just before we test if our buttons work, we need to change one single property of the main list box on the form, and that's the property that allows us to select more than one item. So if we go back to the design view and select the qualities list, we can find the selection mode property, and it's set to 1 by default. We can change that so it's set to multi-simple. And in fact, while we're here, we'll do that for the your qualities list box and the partner qualities list box as well. We'll use that in a few minutes to do another example. So once we've changed all those things, we can start our application, and we'll hopefully find that when the form appears, when we click choose qualities, we can select more than one item from the list. So once we've selected a few items, we can click the set your qualities or set partner qualities button, and those values will be transferred via a list into the list box. We can do a similar thing for the partner qualities to transfer a different list. So that all looks like it's working quite neatly. We should test if we change the values that we select, that we get a completely different list replacing what was in the original list box. If I choose a different list of items and choose set your qualities, that should completely replace what's currently in there. So that looks like that's working too. So let's close down the forms and then close down the output window and think about what we can do next. Next, we can set a way for the user to remove items from the selected your qualities or partner qualities. So let's draw another couple of buttons on the form. Let's have another button just below the your qualities list box, and we'll change that button name, or in fact we'll change the button text first of all, so that it says remove selected with a capital R preferably. And then we'll change the name of the button so it says remove your selected qualities. Remove your selected qualities. Then another button below the partner list box, which will be called remove partner selected qualities. I should have picked shorter names here. And then the text on the button will simply say remove selected again, so we'll keep that quite short and simple. So this will say remove selected. Once again then, we can simply double click on one of these buttons to launch or generate the event handler for the click event for the button, and then write some code to do exactly what the button says it does. This time we'll loop over the selected items collection of the your qualities list box. So we're going to use another ForEach loop to do that. I think it's the most convenient syntax to use. So we'll say ForEach string s in your qualities dot selected items. What we can then do inside the loop is for each item we encounter, we'll remove the item from the list variable stored in this form, in this class. So we'll say your qualities list dot remove, and then we can pass in the value referenced by the string variable s. What we then need to do, of course, that will change the list of items stored in the list variable, but it won't change the list of items stored in the list box on the form. So what we'll do to make that work is we'll just reset the list quickly by saying your qualities dot data source equals null, and then we'll say your qualities dot data source equals your qualities list. So it's a quick, convenient, simple way to reset the values stored in that list box. We need to do the same thing for the partner list box as well. So again, the simplest way to do that, I think, is head back to the form and double click the remove selected button below the partner qualities list box, and then we can just simply copy and paste the code again from the previous routine into this one, and then select all of the text that we've just pasted and use Ctrl and H on the keyboard for find replace. It should still retain the values we had last time, replacing your with partner, so we can click the replace all button quickly, get 5 occurrences replaced, and then close down the find replace window. Just to give this a quick test then, if we start the application again, we should be able to choose qualities, select a few items to add to each list, and then maybe try a couple of different ones for the partner qualities, and then we should be able to do this. We should be able to select individual items or multiple items and click remove selected, and those will be disappeared, or removed, sorry, rather than disappeared. Is that even a verb? And we can do the same thing for the partner list as well. We can always reset all of the qualities in our your qualities or partner qualities list box by selecting some items and clicking set your qualities, and that will replace everything in the list with a new set of values. So all those buttons work reasonably well. Let's close down both forms and get back to the code view of this form. Next, let's provide a way for the user to, rather than just replace all of the your qualities or partner qualities lists, to simply add a few items to the existing list. So back in the design view, we're going to draw another couple of buttons. So we're going to have a button below the set your qualities, and I'm going to change the text on that button so that it's got maybe a single angle bracket. It'll say add to your qualities, and we'll change the name of that button so that it's called add to your qualities. And a similar thing for the partner qualities, of course. So we'll draw another button next to the partner qualities, doing essentially exactly the same thing. So the name of this button will be add to partner qualities, and then the text on the button will be add to partner qualities with a little angled bracket pointing in the correct direction. So add to partner qualities, and with a single angle bracket pointing to the right. I just need to increase the size of that button to make that appear. There we go. Good. So if I double click on the add to your qualities button first to generate the event handler for that click event of that button, we can write some code now that will add some items to our list and reset the items in the list box. So we're going to loop over the selected items collection of the qualities list box again this time. And for each item that we encounter, we're going to make sure that first of all the item we've selected doesn't already exist in the your qualities list. And as long as that condition is true, we can then add it to the existing list. We'll then sort the final list and then reset the data source for the your qualities list box on the form. So the ForEach loop is nice and simple. We've seen that before, so we can say ForEach string s in qualities.selected items. What we then need to do is check that the item we're looking at does not already exist in the your qualities list. So we need an if statement. We need to check if not. So we use the exclamation mark to indicate not. Then we're going to refer to the your qualities list, and then we're going to refer to a method called contains, which we haven't seen yet in the video. So contains tests if something is in the list. So we can pass in a single value to a single parameter, the item parameter, and the value we're going to pass in is going to be the value of the string variable s. So as long as that condition isn't true, as long as that condition is true, so as long as that item doesn't exist in our list already, we can then add it into our list. So we can say your qualities list dot add and then pass in s. And then towards the end, once we've finished looping, we can sort the your qualities list because we might have added items in out of order. So we'll say your qualities list dot sort, and then once again we're going to just reset the your qualities list box. So we're going to say your qualities dot data source equals null, and then your qualities dot data source equals your qualities list. Again, we can do exactly the same thing for the partner qualities, so we can do that quickly and easily by going back to the design view of the form, double click the add to partner qualities button, and then copy and paste all of the code from the previous method and paste that into the new method. Select all the text we pasted, press Ctrl and H for find replace, replace your with partner, click replace all, 6 occurrences replaced, and then close down the find replace window. So again, we should test that this all works now by starting the application. When we click the choose qualities button, let's choose a few items to add into each list box to begin with, and then click the set your qualities. Then what we should be able to do is choose a few other items instead. So let's choose a couple that already exist in the list and a couple of new ones as well. So if we click the add to your qualities button this time, we're not technically replacing everything in the list. We're not clearing the contents of the list, we're adding items to it and then resetting the value of the list box. And that looks like it's working and sorting that in the correct order as well. So we do the same thing for the partner qualities, just to make sure that that works. We add 4 items in, then we can select a few more items as well. So we should find that only the new items we've selected get added when we click the Add to Partner Qualities. So those 2 items work as well. Let's have a look at one more thing we can do to this form. So we'll close down the existing forms and close down the output window, and then back to the design view for one more button. So the last button we're going to add to our form is going to allow us to compare the items we've selected for ourselves and our partners. So we're going to draw another button below the main list box, and I'm going to change the text on this button so it's called so it says Compare Qualities, and then the name of the button is going to be called simply Compare Qualities as well. So Compare Qualities. And what we want to do when we click on this button is process the list of your qualities and partner qualities, checking if there's matching items in either list, and display a final list of the ones which do match. So if we double click on this button to generate the event handler for the Compare Qualities button's click event, we can now add some code that does exactly that. We'll start by declaring a new list which will hold the matching items in both your qualities and partner qualities lists. So we'll say list string, and we'll call this one shared qualities list, and we'll make this equal to a new list string. So equals new list string. What we can then do is loop over one of the 2 lists that already exist in this class. So either the your qualities or the partner qualities list. Doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to say ForEach string s in your qualities list. And then in the braces, what we want to be able to do is compare for each item we encounter, is that contained within the partner qualities list? So we can say if partner qualities list dot contains, open parentheses, pass in a reference to s, and if that's true, we want to add that item into the shared qualities list. So we'll say shared qualities list dot add, we'll say s, and that will leave us with a list of all of the matching items between both partner qualities and your qualities lists. What I'd like to do now is display the final list to the user in a message box. So in order to do that, we need to, I guess we could create a string variable, and I guess we could loop over the shared qualities list, adding each item we encounter to the end of the string variable. But there's a slightly more convenient way to do that with a string. Let's declare a new string variable which we'll call, let's just call it shared qualities in fact. And then we can make that equal to a method of the string class. There's a method called join, which allows you to take a number of items in a collection and put a separating character between them to build a final single string. So there's 2 parameters to pass in. The first is the separator that you want to use. So we could type in, I guess, things like a comma and a space, and that would separate the items with a comma space character. What I'd like to do is actually have each item on a new line, so I'm going to use the escape sequence \n. The second parameter then is the collection of items you want to join together. So for us that's going to be a reference to our shared qualities list, and that will generate the final string containing all of those items. What we can then do is display a message box on screen, so we can say messagebox.show, and then the message itself will say something like your shared qualities are, with a \n to go down to the next line, plus the shared qualities variable, so the full string list. So if we then start the application, and when the main application form appears, click choose qualities, and let's select a few qualities to add to our list, and then add to your qualities. Then let's pick a few slightly different ones to add to the partner list. And then if we click the Compare Qualities button, we should find that we get a list of all of the items that exist in both lists. So we get empathy, generosity, and sense of humour. So there's a few almost practical examples of using lists in your application. You'll probably find many more useful examples of that rather than the fairly convoluted ones I've come up with here. But hopefully now you have a really good idea as to how lists work in general, and an idea at least of how you can start to apply those to your own code. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseR website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.